a mentoring lounge brought to you by the International Mentoring Community. I am Stephen Hobbs. Doug Lawrence is joining us, and we're taking a look at the topic of mentoring as it's connected with diversity, inclusion, and equity. We could put a word like manage in front of it, manage diversity, inclusion, equity, using a mentoring approach. So if you're a professional, paraprofessional, then this is a way to up level. If you find yourself in other capacities and you're mentoring, whether paid or free, again, the story of diversity, inclusion, and equity is very important. And how do you manage them? So I just want to share with you before Doug and I introduce ourselves is the word manage is sort of along a continuum. So one of the things is to understand to define terms like diversity, inclusion, equity, and list out what are the characteristics and identify what are some of the tenets of it. Be able to discuss what these terms mean. Get to the point of showing how you use certain elements of this, all the way up until you notion you're dealing with the managing of the systems that involve diversity, inclusion, and equity. So I just wanted to place that in context today, is because we're going at this topic on a very broad level in a sense, because we could dive in very specifics. We are going to sort of lean into how this connects to mental health and workplace, because we're sort of connecting it with professionals and paraprofessionals, just so that you have an idea. But it has application on a very wide basis. And both Doug and I say, listen, wherever we can help out, we'll help out, but we sometimes have to give a little bit of a targeted presentation so that we can get our points across. And then you leverage, or what I say is leverage, what you're learning and take it into your own practice. Now, having said that, Doug, you want to just share a little bit about who you are in connection to IMC, and then I'll do the same.
I sure can. So I'm Doug Lawrence, and I'm the Director of Practice and Outreach with IMC, and I have my own company as well, a company called Talent C, which is focused on, for the most part, the easiest way to describe it is all things mentoring. And I'm fairly actively involved in the mentoring mental health space.
And I'm Stephen Hobbs. I am a co-founder. I deal with the end of the audit, verification, and supporting the education component. So often you come in, you meet Doug, he gets you set up, making sure that what we're going to do to help you out. If you only want to learn about mentoring and practice, not worry about certification, okay. If you want to get into the certification, then you'll get involved with me. I have my own company, Wealth Movement, WELLTH. It's all about well living and well-being to the nth degree, the movement that requires. And guess what? Mentoring is one of the ways in which to do that movement. And it's certainly an important topic linked to something called legacy. So Doug and I have been at this for a few years now, and we keep presenting these, I guess, presentations, broadcasts, depending on where you're listening in from, the Mentoring Lounge. And we're always updating, finding new ideas, looking at it through different lenses. We've made some presentations about this topic of diversity, inclusion, and equity before, but we thought we would just bring a certain, some other nuances to the topic. There's a lot of things that are going on in the world, going on in workplaces, and we just thought that we would add some more insights into that mix. Is that a fair assessment, Doug?
Yes, it is.
Yeah. So to be able to get this set up, I think that what we're going to do, and I'm going to use the word I think, which might suggest to you listening in, you're going, oh, doesn't he know where he's going, or don't they know where they're going? We do, but sometimes in our conversations and sometimes through the chat function, someone will ask a question and we may go off a little bit and then come back. But By the time we're done, we'll have talked about diversity, inclusion, equity as equity, sorry, as it connects with mentoring and has this mental health connection to it. So Doug is going to start off with a definition of mentoring as we use it in the IMC. And then I'm going to bring up a base image and just do some quick chats around it. And then we're going to go into the elements of what we're going to be taking a look at. So Doug, you want to, in a sense, I think I'll bring the image up sooner. So what we're doing is number one here, mentoring, mentor, mentee, and Doug's going to define that term for us. Doug?
So the definition that we use is that mentoring is a two-way trusted relationship where the mentor and mentee learn and develop together through personal and professional development. Now, underneath or sort of propping up that definition, there are 5 key characteristics of mentoring. And what those are number 1, guidance and support. Number 2 is relationship building / nurturing. Number 3 is knowledge, skill, which includes attitude development. Number 4 is networking and connections. And finally, number 5 is personal and professional growth.
Yeah, we're sort of picking up on that personal professional growth, connecting it to mental health today. We and Doug shared is there's this notion of reciprocation that's taking place between the mentor and the mentee. So I just want to acknowledge that. There's actually a term coming on that's gaining some momentum, and if you're going to put an adjective in front of mentoring, they'll often use the word reciprocal. And that is one of the ways in which to take a look at it. So we're just going to acknowledge that today. But in our presentation, what we want to do is we want to talk about the diversity, the inclusion, the equity, and this notion of holistic reciprocal. I want to just sort of have a look at that at the very end. But the notion of diversity is taking a look at it through the lens of experiences and perspectives. Inclusion is support and safety. Equity is around fairness and opportunity, and we want to bring these to life for you. So we're going to start off with the notion of the diversity at this point in time. And I just want to acknowledge is that this topic of diversity is quite an interesting one for me because it leans into this notion of experiences and perspectives and backgrounds. And I've had the pleasure, and Doug can share a little bit of his own story here. I've had the pleasure working around the world. And so on my trips, sometimes even on vacations, driving great distances, visiting different countries and working in different places, I certainly got different perspectives of what's going on in the world. I got lots of experiences of what worked and what didn't work. And I also got a lot of insights for my own background and how I presented, even in some of the work that I've done as a professional and paraprofessional. So I wanted to acknowledge that because of this notion of diversity, about perspectives, backgrounds, experiences, lived experiences, because there is a lot of that we bring forward. We represent who we are by bringing that forward. But guess what? We're also meeting the mentee who is also sharing that with us, their perspectives, their experiences, their backgrounds. And to be able to sort of meet that, the metaphor that's coming to mind is we're at the dinner table and we're sharing and we're bringing some different foods to the table. It's a bit of a potluck, and you may not always know what the person's going to bring, and they're bringing a couple of dishes, you're bringing a couple of dishes, and there it is on the table, and you're going, okay, how's this all going to mesh and match together? And you know what? It works. And that is beautiful. It's sort of like breaking bread kind of idea, to be able to have that connection, those conversations go on. But also this diversity aspect is a way to lean into getting to other opportunities, because the mentee is accessing your opportunities. Guess what? As a mentor, you're accessing opportunities of the mentee, even by the question they're asking, right? There's ways like that that are important. The notion of skill development, practice development takes place, and for both the mentor and the mentee. And to that, there's going to be 5 points. So I'm going to, or tips, very quick tips I'm going to give. So if we actually are sort of thinking of this as the overview and taking a look at these 3 areas, I'm going to hit a couple of tips as well. And Doug is going to share some as well as we go along. The area he's going to sort of bring some tips together is in the area of inclusion. So we'll take a look at that. But also this notion here is the diversity and all of what I learned over the years. And I would be presenting on lots of different topics. And I remember one was around HIV and AIDS and community. And I was in Africa, and I remember finding myself in the position making presentations. And one of the things that I had to really figure out very quickly is, yeah, there's me, I'm making this presentation, but guess what? I can't always make the presentation in my words and my way of thinking about things to a community, a village in a country in Africa. And that's where I had to get a co-presenter with me, and she was able to work together to be able to find a way in which to make a presentation. It's the same thing around mentoring. Is you have to remember that the mentee is also like a co-presenter, right? And you're working, interacting, and answering the questions and finding out things, because you as a mentor benefit from that. And it's a great way to break down bias, both for the mentor and the mentee, and any stereotypes that you might bring forward. And with the diversity angle of it, knowing is that workplaces today are very diverse. The idea about being able to open up through things like Zoom calls to bring people from all different parts of the world into a conversation, different perspectives, backgrounds, experiences, all of a sudden coming in. How do you deal with that? How do you up-level yourself as a professional interacting in those kind of situations? And what's the mental health aspect that's underpinning it? So what I thought I would do is, it's great to talk about it, you know, so this conceptual overview kind of idea. But here's 5 tips I'd like to share with you around this. And Doug, just jump in if there's anything you want to add to any of these, okay? And I'll do the same when we take a look at the inclusion aspect. One of the things that I've learned is to embrace cultural humility. I don't know what's happening in every cultural perspective, and I'm learning all the time as I open it up. Even though I've traveled widely, I'm still learning, constantly learning, constantly learning. So cultural humility, there's a really important term for us. This notion of empathy and understanding is, how do you foster it from a diverse perspective? If you're interacting with people from different cultures, you're interacting different genders, whatever it might be, how is it that you can bring empathy and understanding to the foreground and thinking about that? Here's one that I've learned, and sometimes it was the hard way. It's about collaborative conversations. It's not a one-directional conversation as a mentor to mentee. It ain't gonna cut it anymore, right? It just is not gonna cut it anymore. And how do you bring the collaborative out? How do you help the mentee to understand they can be assertive and cooperative, just like you can be assertive and cooperative as a mentor? How do you bring that together? And to find ways in which to, this sort of links into the first one, is how do you encourage cultural exchanges? How do you then learn? How do you bring ways to the foreground? And sometimes that could just simply be as, hey, listen, let's go to another restaurant. It might be linked to your culture or something that you really enjoy as a mentee. You're inviting me as a mentor and vice versa, and have a conversation there. And I've done that a couple of times and actually got the owner of the restaurant actually joined us for about 10 minutes to have a conversation about the perspectives of professionals, because he actually had immigrated to Canada, was a professional in his country, but he chose not to pursue that. Instead, he followed his passion of cooking. And I thought it was great. I didn't know about it until what was, I think it was a waitress mentioned it and said something like that. And they said, hey, can I talk? And we just, and it all fell together. He's sat down, we had a great conversation. So it was about the cultural humility, but it was also about a cultural exchange that took place. And it was just wonderful, wonderful experience to see that and then talk about it afterwards. And the other idea is, as a mentor, bringing diverse representation to your mentoring and asking the mentee to do the same thing. So don't get caught up is that if I have my lived experience and only presenting, is go out, experience some other things, and how can I bring that into the mentoring? Sort of links into the last one that I just mentioned. I gave you that restaurant example. So I'm forever reading into other areas around professional topics linked to the things that I deal with, like legacy, just so that when I'm having conversations with people, I've got different angles that are looking at. So I am advancing my diverse insights as I bring it forward. So those are just some tips. I'm hoping that makes sense. And Doug, is there anything there that jumps out at you want to bring to the foreground?
The one thing that I would touch on would be when you talked about the whole culture piece, is that how I look at it in some situations I've been involved in is that there's actually cultural behaviors that take place. And because it's part of the workplace, is that sometimes those cultural behaviors butt heads because I don't understand how in a workplace how the mentee would operate based on their culture, and they in return wouldn't understand how what the expectation is in either one of those situations.
Yeah, and you also have the pleasure of being able to, through technology like this one where we're presenting on, to be able to have conversations with mentees in different parts of the world, don't you?
I do, yes. And I've also done remote or virtual teaching as well, where we've provided a means or a pathway for people to enhance their knowledge of mentoring so that they can deliver a more richer and deeper mentoring experience.
Yeah. So again, Doug would be going, okay, how do I prepare? So what are my diverse aspects? What are my biases? What stereotypes might end up coming into this? And sometimes Doug and I, when we get together and we're talking about other things to do with IMC, we'll sort of share some stories about things that are happening and the interactions we take place. So I know he's always doing that, which is great. So let's take a look at the next one, and it's to look at this notion of inclusion around support and safety. And I'll just bring to the surface here, and then we're going to get Doug talking some tips for us here, is that this notion of inclusion is about supporting work environments. I use the term well-living organization, sometimes well-living workplace, depends who I'm chatting with. And the well-living aspect is about living well together, all right? So living well, learning well, laughing well together, and to be able to support that to actually take place. Now, if you sort of take it into the diverse aspect, not everyone who comes into the workplace necessarily wants to have fun, and there might be a little clash that takes place, and you got to sort of figure out how to deal with some of that. I've had that happen on a couple of team building days where I'm trying to bring some fun in, and I get a couple of looks, and people come over and, why are we having fun this way? Aren't we supposed to be learning and getting into it? And I'm going, yeah, but have you thought about it from this perspective? And that was challenging the bias aspect. And before I knew it, they were in having fun and thinking this is great. And I said, whew, okay, got that one taken care of, right? So I did a little quick mentoring in that presentation. But it's that notion of the supportive work environment, all right? And creating a sense of belonging. I think that's an important word, right? To connect it with being and becoming, you have to feel like you're belonging. And if you're coming into a workplace and you don't feel like you belong, and people are sort of shuffling you off to the side all the time, that's not a great inclusive workplace. And I don't think in my life, have you ever experienced being sort of put off to the side and not included in the workplace? Did you ever have an example of that, Doug? Do you want,
Oh, yeah.
can you share a little bit about it without giving too much away?
It was such that if you were not part of the circle, then you were put off to the side. And what had ended up happening was if you made a decision based on, at that particular time point, based on the information you were provided, if it wasn't a decision that came from one of the people in the circle, then it was discounted, immediately discounted. And the author of that, which in that case was me, got pushed off to the side, and it took away from the dignity and the respect that I should, or that I was to be afforded in the position that I was in. And it also, what it ends up doing is it can create, as I refer to it, it can refer or relate to a robotic employee. So somebody who just, waits to be told what to do and does that, and no more, no less. And because, they've been kind of cast off, pushed off to the side. And there's also, from an inclusive workplace, there's also the fear of, if I go ahead and try to make change, and it's, am I going to incur the wrath of this, as I call it, the circle? And I don't really want to have that take place, especially when it tarnishes my dignity.
So that certainly feeling of not belonging is going to influence your being and becoming, right? And that plays itself out. Like I say, I was sitting here listening. I'm going, I don't think I've ever really felt that element. Now, there are some aspects, okay, I'm in other countries, I don't know the language and all that, but I didn't feel as though like I was shuffled off or anything like that. I still attempted to be present, and even if it was only to have a greeting of hello when I walked in, and then the translator helped me, things like that. But I've not felt as though like I was pushed like right over and away from things. I've been included, and I've been a lot of different places doing a lot of different kind of things. So I think that's great. Just before leaving sort of this overview, before I ask Doug to talk about some tips, one of the important aspects about the inclusion is, as a mentor, you may be coming at this because you manage and lead, or the mentee you're interacting with is a manager or a leader, or they're aspiring into that. One of the things to really think about from an inclusion point of view is how you manage, how you lead. And you've got to check and balance that out, because if you don't, right, you can't always use the way that you manage and lead in one situation is going to be how it's going to apply in the next situation. It's going to apply in the next situation, right? You have to figure out, okay, what's going to work for the situation that I'm entering into, and what do I have up my sleeve to be able to make this happen? So when we bring that back into the notion of mentoring, right, Doug, you can't go into every situation going, well, I have mentoring A approach. I'm going to use it in this situation, this situation. It doesn't quite work that way. So here's some tips, Doug. I think, do you want to just share a few and see where we go with some tips here?
Sure can. The one, and probably one of the primary ones, is to foster a psychological, uh, to promote psychological safety. And it's really important that that's there, because what you need to be able to do is to create that safe and supportive environment for your mentee to share their thoughts. And where I see this really coming to play quite a bit is when you're mentoring in the mental health space, and how important it is to create that safe and supportive space, because you want to be able to sort of get to what's the root cause of the behaviors that are taking place. And the only way to do that is for you to be able to create that safe place where the mentee feels comfortable to be able to share those inner secrets, we'll call them. So there's definitely that's one. The other one that is important as well is to model integrative behaviors, and actually to be able to demonstrate inclusive behaviors. So, and the example I gave was not from my lived experiences. That particular example is not a good one as far as an outcome perspective, in that, it was the inclusive behaviors were definitely not there, even though, you may be reaching out as trying to get included because you have more to contribute or offer to the discussion and all those things. But you weren't being allowed to because you were not part of that circle. And actually, that was a great segue on my part, where I mentioned communication. And it's really important that communication seems to be, when I take a look at all things that I'm involved in, being able to create a safe place for open communication to take place is extremely critical in today's, work environment, and even outside of the work environment. And you want to be able to provide that encouragement to your mentee to feel comfortable enough to voice their opinions and express themselves in a manner that will help promote a team environment.
Yeah, all great points, and I think that if we add to that, there's something I guess pet peeve. I don't know, but often what happens, people will say, "Well, I'm going to give you some feedback right now," and as soon as I hear that, I go, "Oh, that's not really an inclusive kind of language." And the point I want to make is the language you use is really important. So I use the word feed forward. And that sort of unpacks for me a way in which to say to the person that I'm interacting with is that there's something I'd like to share with you that's going to move you forward, not to go and dig about something that has taken place that could have taken place last week or an hour ago or something like that. No, let's just take what we've said now. It's present, this open communication that Doug just mentioned, and being able to really bring that to the foreground and share that. For me, that's a really inclusive way in which to interact with my mentee. So that language, and I'm just using one of the words, feedback versus feed forward. So that became really important for me. And that sort of brings to the attention, then how do you make sure you bring that kind of language into meetings, into your dialogue, into this open communication that we're talking about, because that gives a sense of being inclusive, this notion of belonging. These are all really important ways in which to do that. Anything you want to add to that before we go to the next topic, Doug?
No.
Okay. All right. So the next one that we wanted to just sort of take a look at, and again, I'll remind you, if you have any questions, just use the chat function and we'll do our best to get to it and see if we can help you out. But the fourth area we wanted to just chat about was equity, around this notion of fairness and opportunity. So I've got a couple of things I want to share, and then I know Doug may have a tip or two that he wants to put into the mix. But the notion of equity is ensuring fairness and opportunity, right? It's a little bit different than equality, you know, this notion of the state of being equal, which sort of is an outcome aspect. Equity is sort of like the process of a fair and opportunity are there. And when you're interacting with your mentee is, how can you make sure that there's equity there for the mentee in terms of maybe where they want to go, who you're introducing them to, who do they want to interact with and why, and attempting to find, you know, what's a fair way to move forward, where are the opportunities that are available, and not as a mentor going, I'll do that for you, but I'm not going to do that for you. And it's sort of hidden away. No, challenge yourself. That's not going to be a very diverse and inclusive way in which to do your mentoring and your up-leveling. So really pay attention to that aspect of things. Because really, again, and we've sort of mentioned some of this, there's the notion of what we're looking at, what's the guidance you want to provide, the support you want to, what's your role modeling, how are you doing it to be able to sort of show fairness and opportunity. That becomes really important. There's a phrase that I always use, and I encourage mentors to think this through, is whatever way your feet are pointed is the way that your mentoring approach is unfolding. And people, what are you talking about? Well, just think it through. So if I'm sitting here and Doug and I, all right, my feet are facing forward into the presentation, our conversation here. Let me give you a sense of, if my feet are pointed away from the screen, you can see the difference in my body presentation. So I've been in meetings and people have been sort of sitting, and I know they're not present. They may have their legs stretched out. Great, I appreciate that. But you can also see them drifting off every once in a while, right? And so one of the things I always acknowledge when I'm here is get my feet pointed. And I think it's important to sort of think about it from that perspective, right? And to help out, to be supportive. And, you know, what network that you're going to offer to your mentee is important. And being in this notion of professional, paraprofessional world, being in a mental health, who would you suggest that they have conversations with, right? And all of that kind of thing. But one of the other areas about this area of equity, I think you've probably heard the phrase, pay it forward. What is supported and who's supported you? How might you pay it forward, right? And this is where I'm going to play with words, all right? But it applies to a word that I emphasized, I don't know, 7 or 8 minutes ago, all right? Instead of pay it forward, I talk about share it fromward, all right? So pay it forward, this notion of pay something and people go pay money, right? Share it fromward. It could be my time, it could be my effort, it could be a lot of other things. And I just find it another way in which to think about it, and to be able to unfold this notion of equity is about share it fromward and encouraging it in your vocabulary as a mentor, and thus with your mentee as well, because that has a lot of long-term impact. Okay, so I thought I'd share that with you. Is there a couple of tips you want to share at this point in time? And maybe I'll put in a couple as well. And what do we got to offer on this one, Doug?
I think one of the things that I look at is the ability to be able to, everybody is unique. And so we need to acknowledge or recognize that everyone has their own individual strengths, and we need to tap into that. And we also need to acknowledge the uniqueness of every person, every mentee, every mentor. We need to acknowledge the uniqueness of each and every one of those, because in their own way, they bring something different to the table that enhances the mentoring relationship and the mentoring process.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, for sure. So it's also advocating, right, for opportunities. Sometimes you may, as a mentor, you may have to go that little bit extra step, strides, right, to help that mentee to sort of get past, maybe it might be a bit of a door, closed door, or a wall, or something like that. And how might you help that person out to find that opportunity, right? To open that up, the notion of the equity for that person. I've had to do it a couple of times. I was doing a large contract in the leadership area, and it was a transportation company. And a lot of the persons I was interacting with, they were at a leadership course level where some of them would become like regional directors and superintendents, right? They were going to be up leveled in from their professional point of view because of their lived experience. And how might I help them out? And part of that is they went through a 3-day program, and then I did some mentoring afterwards. A couple of times they would come in with that sort of long face and sort of, I'm not getting anywhere with what I'm attempting to do. And so I had to go, okay, is there something you would like me to do to assist you? Do you want to chat about something? And there was a couple of times I couldn't help because they were asking something that was a little outside of where I was going. But there was a couple of times where I said, okay, if you're all right, I'm going to go to the contact that I interact with and find a way to make an introduction for you, right? So that it feels like it's still inside the organization, right? But it doesn't feel like it's like a complete cold introduction. One person wanted to meet one of the VPs, right? But it was an area completely different from where they were they were going, climbing on the ladder, so to speak, if I was to use that. It was a completely different area, but they really liked how they presented at a couple of meetings. And they said they wanted to chat with them about how they presented. So they didn't feel as though they could just go and do it themselves. So we found a way to have that happen. And that, for me, was advocating for opportunities and to provide that sort of sense of equity for them. So that was kind of fun, all right, to be able to help out in that way. Do you have another one you wanted to share, Doug?
The one that jumps to sort of mind, and it's largely due to how much of a factor it is with the practice of mentoring that I have, but it's the whole idea of promoting collaborative language. And so what I typically teach and what I typically tell people is that we have two ways to approach it. I can suggest to you, I can say, what are you going to do in this particular situation? So emphasis on the word you. So I've isolated that individual, and they're now for the most part, in control of what the potential outcomes might be. Versus if it's done in a more collaborative fashion, using the words, what is it that we are going to do? So using we and us versus you, or in that regard, to be able to create. What I try to do is to make sure that people understand they're not on the island by themselves. That I'm there to provide support and guidance, but I'm not going to give them the answer either. I'm going to stimulate their critical thinking so they can think their way through and be able to come to a conclusion that's going to provide them the best outcome that they could hope for.
Yeah. And from this equity point of view, one of the things that I would encourage mentors with their mentees, the both of you, is to get involved with your professional paraprofessional network, because in there you will find the diversity, the inclusion, but also what you're going to do is, as a mentor, you might find other mentors. As a mentee, you might find other mentees. And how do you have conversations as a mentor to mentor about how to improve your mentoring? Mentee to mentee, how do you improve your menteeism way, your mentee approach kind of idea? So get involved with those networks. Sometimes people shy away from them, but every once in a while, if you're not into the going to network meetings and that, every once in a while go have some conversations, see what's going on, and see if it improves, focuses, and strengthens your diversity, your inclusion, your equity, and finding ways. And if you go back and listen to this video again, you might pick up something and go, oh, I hadn't thought of it that way. That's another angle. Because if you bring all of these three areas together, right, there are some tips that I'd like to just, on an overall basis, and this is going to be like my summary very quickly of what's going on. And then that'll get us close to closing, Doug, I think. And as we always do, Doug does the closeout. But what I would share with you from my head, heart, and hands to you, dear mentors, all right, is prioritize your mentees' well-being, because from a diversity, inclusion, and equity point of view, one of those might be a little off for the person, and that's going to influence their well-being, and therefore figure out a way in which to pay attention to what's going on. So prioritize that, figure out that in your conversation. And that links to the mental health aspect of this. There's also encourage self-care practices for yourself and also the mentee. And, taking care of yourself. You have your own well-being and well-living as well. And guess what? That links to the mental health aspect of things. Also, I would encourage you, and we've sort of highlighted this, but it's that foster a sense of belonging. Most people who are professionals and paraprofessionals can jump into being and becoming. I get that. But sometimes you might shy away. You might find yourself moving away from belonging in a network, belonging to the network that's available to you. And I would encourage you to find ways to foster that sense, both you as a mentor, and if it's a way to help the mentee, then please do. And that helps the mental health aspect as well. Another one that I would encourage is you may have to look at advocacy, all right? This notion of encouraging mentee advocacy, helping out the mentee. Now, if the word advocacy sort of doesn't quite go with things, I have used this notion of encourage mentee actionists, actions, right? It takes some people don't like some words like advocacy and things like that. And I go, well, take up how do you serve as an actionist with your mentee? And sometimes that takes the edge off of certain things. And the last one that I would share, all right, just before we truly head into closing, is to really foster this sense of mentoring beyond just your connection, because you as a mentor can go on to mentor others. But guess what? The mentee can become a mentor and expand their sense of what it means. And that deepens and enriches the learning, knowing, and sharing of the mentee. It really gets the concepts and practices to the foreground. And again, that helps the mental health aspect of things as well. But it also improves focuses and strengthens your professional approach, your paraprofessional approach, right? So using mentoring does up-level that. And that's why we're encouraging you to continually take a look at that from a continuous learning, continuous improvement perspective. So just before I turn it over to Doug, I just want to remind you, comment, like, share. the first and third Wednesdays is the Mentoring Lounge. Sometimes we put other ones in, just depends what's happening on a given time where we're going with things. There are some shifts and shuffles that are taking place. We have a bigger announcement that's going to take place on the first Wednesday of next month, June, where we're going to up level, let you know everything that's going on around what's taking place. But know that I think Doug and I would both agree, from a diversity, inclusion, and equity point of view, it's a really great way to support professionals and paraprofessionals in up-leveling their own professional practice using mentoring. But we're going to put a word called Journey Mentor with that. And we want to share a little bit more about what that might mean for you as a professional paraprofessional. So again, subscribe, comment, like, share. Anything you can do to help us to get this out and about would be wonderful, and we thank you for doing that. So Doug, I'm going to ask to close out. So one of the things we traditionally do is I bring people into the mentoring lounge. Doug has the pleasure of taking us out. So when he's done his summary point, I'll just say take care, and I will close off the broadcast. So Doug?
So today we talked about a lot of things, and I encourage our listeners to take a moment and go back and listen to some of the tips that were provided. And for me, one that stands out is the fostering of psychological safety. And I think a large part of that stems from my involvement in the mental health space. So take a few moments of your time out of your day and go back and listen to some of those tips and start to think about how you can put some of those to practice. And if you do, you're going to create that deeper, richer mentoring experience that we all strive for.
All right, everyone, take care.